So, I would just love for you to give a brief overview of how you are today and the kind of companies you've run and places you've been to get to where you are today.
Yeah, you bet. Oh man, where to start? There's a lot to cover there. I think, so I went to, I guess to give a brief background of my experience, right? I went to BYU and studied mechanical engineering. And after that, I worked in the med device space for quite a few years. So as part of a rotational development program at Edwards Life Sciences, and there really get to experience a lot of neat things with that company. I worked in Irvine, California, here in Utah, and then also in Switzerland for them,
Wow.
and worked on projects here in the U.S. and abroad. And it was a really neat engineering experience for me.
Wow.
From there, I started working on one of my startups, Maglock Bike Pedal. While an employee at Edwards, I started working on it on the side and did a successful Kickstarter. And so once I got that company up and running, I decided that it's time to leave Edwards and focus my efforts on Maglock. The interesting thing, though, the funny thing was that basically around that same time, I'd also decided to apply to business school.
Wow.
A friend of mine was doing it, and I figured, hey, I'd always thought about doing this. Some of my family had done it, and always had that interest, an entrepreneurial spirit and interest in business. So I decided to take the GMAT and got a good score, and so applied to a couple schools, and ultimately. 2 days before I left Edwards to focus on Maglock, I got a call from Stanford that I'd been admitted to their business school.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, so it was kind of funny where I was jumping in to focus on a startup, but found out 2 days before that that actually no, like this will be short-lived because you're going to be going to grad school.
Wow. Wow. Um, to go off of that, your educational background obviously includes that Master's of Business Administration at Stanford. How
Mhm.
has your MBA influenced your career path and your decision-making process within your entrepreneurial career?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's influenced it a lot. Before that, I definitely was entrepreneurial. I failed to mention while I was at BYU, I started a nonprofit that does prosthetics. So I like to say, I've toyed in all different types of businesses, like the small startups, like Kickstarter type startup like Maglock. I've done nonprofits like 2 Feet Prosthetics. And then also been part of venture-backed startups. Recently I was with Blissway that we'd worked with angel investors and venture investors to raise money to for that startup.
Wow.
And I think that's where was one of the big values I got out of going to Stanford was really coming to understand that last style of business, the one where you go out and get investors to invest in you, and understanding what that takes to make that happen. I think prior to doing that, I really had an attitude of like, no, I want to own 100% of my own company. I don't want investors involved. Like I want it to be my thing just because once you bring an investor on, it must be very challenging. But going to business school, getting to know a lot of folks who were investors and even classmates who'd worked as investors. And myself, I worked short term as an intern at Peterson Partners, Peterson Ventures in Salt Lake. So got that venture experience
Mhm.
as well. I came to understand no, actually, venture investors can bring a lot of value to your company. It can really help you rapidly grow and develop your company.
Wow.
So that was definitely a huge thing I learned going to business school and just all of, I mean, they always say this is the classic thing that's said is that you build out a strong network.
Hmm.
Uh, but I hands down totally agree with that. I think it opened my eyes to like what all is out there, what everybody's involved in, in regards to like hedge funds, private equity, venture investing, and in the tech world, what's happening with startups. So really opened my eyes there and helped me build out a good, strong network that I can rely on for those things.
Awesome. That's amazing. Stemming off of that, to someone who is new to the industry and new to all the various industries that come within the business world, what are your approaches to building meaningful connections and networking with people?
Great question. I think obviously going to business school helped a lot where I could build a lot of those friendships. And I think it does come down to friendship, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that those relationships are more than just transactional and trying to build those friendships is huge.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I remember as a kid toying with the idea of going into business because I watched my dad. So my parents are both accountants. My dad had been a CFO at various church companies here locally. So I saw what he did, and I saw, oh, he got to play golf all the time. I was like, that sounds amazing. Like, I'd love to be in business just so I could play golf. And
Mm-hmm.
I played golf in high school, worked at a
Yeah.
golf course, so I really loved that. I'd say nowadays golf has kind of died down as a business activity. It still happens, but not nearly as popular as it used to be.
Yeah.
But in its place nowadays, really mountain biking's become a very big activity that folks are involved in, and skiing.
Yes.
Both those things I'm very passionate about, and kind of see posters on the
Yes.
the
Yes.
back wall.
I love to
I
ski, so I love those posters.
Oh, good. Yeah. So I mean, I when I worked for Edwards, I lived just by Chamonix, so I would ski there and
Wow.
really loved that experience. But it also helped me realize that Utah skiing is very comparable to Swiss skiing.
Yes.
And so we're really blessed with the skiing we have here in
We
Utah.
we are lucky. We take it for granted.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's awesome.
Hmm.
So like for instance, a bunch of my buddies that I lived with down at Stanford, they're coming to town next week here to Utah to do a ski trip. So it's fun that I
Amazing.
get to connect with them, and then
Yeah.
I have friends from Stanford coming to town all the time to ski.
Yeah.
I guess that has been a nice value of being in Utah. Like the downside of not being in the Bay Area is I don't have that big network that I'm seeing all the time, because there are a lot of those people that are still out there in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
But amazingly, I think thanks to COVID, we actually had quite a few move to Utah. From our class, our
Yeah.
2019 class, we realized, I think out of everybody in our class, the 420 students or whatever it was, there was one that had moved to Boston,
Wow.
and yet there were 10 that had moved to Utah. And
Wow.
we're like, that's crazy. We
That
have a
is
lot
fascinating. I
here in
would not
Utah.
expect that. Wow.
So interesting. Made us kind of chuckle because obviously our big rivals out in Boston,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Cambridge, that's the school that shall not be named. And
We won't speak of it.
yep. But it's been neat being here in Utah, where we do have a lot of folks that come out, and get to see them a lot. And honestly, I think the tech industry here is developing well, which is nice to see. I think it's still got a lot to do to
Mhm.
develop.
Yeah.
It's hard to really be on the same level of what's out in the Bay Area, but it's neat to see what's happening here in Utah.
Yeah. With that being said, you're talking about the opportunity that's within Utah. What are some things that aspiring innovators and entrepreneurs that are potentially still in school can do today to be able to be a part of that?
Good question. I think one is like obviously connecting with folks,
Yeah.
like especially when you're in school, you have that ability to reach out to folks and say, "Hey, I'm a student. I'm
Yeah.
looking to learn. Can we
Hard.
connect? Like, can we connect to go out to lunch, meet up for a drink?" One thing it's been funny being here in Utah is struggling with the whole like let's grab a coffee, because that's
Yeah.
like not a thing here,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it really is like so common in the Bay Area and elsewhere. And so the joke is, hey, let's grab like a diet soda or
Yeah.
something else. I don't know.
Headed
And
to Utah.
yes, exactly. And so it's like trying to figure out like a good corollary for that is great, where it's like, hey, let's meet up, and even just for like a half-hour chat,
Yeah.
something that's pretty low commitment wise, but gives you the ability to get to know folks, understand what they're doing, how they got there, I think is huge. And then
Yeah.
secondly, like really developing those skills, seeing what you can do to help those folks
Yeah.
out. I've worked with a handful of students, tons of students actually through 2 feet. We have a club on campus in engineering school, so we have a lot of students coming through that, and it's been neat to work with those and see those certain students who are really good at working hard and being committed. And honestly, when I've met those students, I've helped them get jobs at med device companies, or I've had them work with me, and I've loved it. So it's been neat connecting with those students. And so I think that's a big thing as a student too, is
Mhm.
trying to connect with these business founders and seeing what you can do to help them out. Um, Maybe starting out as an intern or something like that. And but when you're doing that, making sure you do your best to show, hey, I can deliver, I can provide value to you and your company.
Absolutely. So obviously you're wearing your 2 feet shirt, and I've noticed it's pretty prevalent on your LinkedIn and stuff. Will you go into detail about what that is? And obviously you're involved in some impactful innovation, so how 2 feet has been able to help you accomplish that?
Yeah, for sure. So 2 feet, it started back in 2009.
Mhm.
So I guess the kind of the back history to that, I had always like in high school, I really wanted to be a biomedical engineer. I decided that like my senior year, like I love the idea of being an engineer, but working on stuff that changes people's lives. But I also really wanted to go to BYU. And so the challenge was BYU did not have a biomedical engineering program. And so after my mission, I was trying to figure out like, well, what do I do? Do I need a transfer? Like what should I do to really specialize in this? And I decided that I would build kind of like an underground self-guided biomedical engineering experience for myself at BYU. So I got involved in like the biomedical engineering club, and early on, was volunteering with them. Started out like over activities, and then my second year became the president of the club. I also did research with different professors in the chemical engineering and the mechanical engineering departments that did biomedical type stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was toying around in different things that could like help me become more of a biomedical engineer. Obviously, mostly focused on mechanical engineering, but like having that ability and that focus there too.
Yeah.
And so, as the president of the biomedical engineering club, we sat down as leadership at the beginning of the year and said, "Hey, what can we do to help students involved in this club like gain that skill set so they can like show on the resume like, yes, I can work on medical devices. Like I'm a biomedical engineer." And we decided we wanted to do something that give them the opportunity to serve, but also the opportunity to do research. And so that's how we kind of stumbled into this idea of working on a prosthetic leg. We discussed as leadership, we're like, well, do we develop like a low cost heart valve for developing countries? Like, no, an implantable device is really challenging.
That
Like, what's
is.
something that's simple? Oh, probably like a prosthetic leg. And we had no idea what we were doing. And I think that is one key to success in entrepreneurship is like even when you have no idea what you're doing, it's like trying to learn it and just pushing yourself to go for it. Like there's always that step of faith that you have to take into the dark. It's like we really don't know what we're doing, but we're gonna go for it anyways. And so that's what we did. We sponsored a design competition in the engineering school that fall, where we invited all engineers to design low cost prosthetic legs for developing countries, and we would have a competition and judge them and decide who had the best design and all that. So we conducted that, got a whole bunch of applicants. I think 15-20 people submitted their designs. We honestly like looked at those designs afterwards. Once we knew what was happening, we're
Yeah.
like, wow, we had no idea what we were doing. Which was also a good learning for us. Because we realized it is very critical to work with those involved in the industry to understand what the actual needs are. And I think that's something we didn't do up front is connect with prosthetists to
Mm,
really understand like what they are trying to build for amputees.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, we found from that design competition, like, okay, we want to do this,
Yeah.
but we really don't know what we're developing. So once we connected with those prosthetists, they help us better understand like this is how you should design a prosthetic leg to help amputees.
Yeah.
Um, but that competition kind of kicked things off. Then we gathered, 15 students together. And with that group of 15 students, we applied for 8 ORCA grants
Wow.
and basically like, paired everybody off. Like, okay, everybody like apply for these different
Yeah.
specific research areas. And then of those 8 that we applied for, we got 4 ORCA grants, so that gave us some funding to start working on a low cost prosthetic leg design.
It's amazing.
And from there, we had a guy get involved who was very keen on the business aspect of 2 feet.
Hmm.
Um, I think up to that point, we thought, okay, we'll just design something and then put it online, like make it open source. But
Yeah.
he came up and said, hey, like we really could form some sort of venture. And so we started working on like a venture plan for that and competed in the business plan competition over in the Marriott School. They told us like this is interesting, but you're not a business, you're a nonprofit. We're like, oh, cool, okay. And so then we pivoted and competed in the social venture competition and ended up winning it that year, which gave us a lot of funding and they helped us form a nonprofit. And so that's like how we ended up becoming a nonprofit as a and started as an organization.
That's amazing. So you've obviously been involved in some humanitarian trips. I was looking at your LinkedIn post and I found that those were fascinating. How do you balance your passion for social impact initiatives with your entrepreneurial ventures?
That's a good question. I'd say it's nice to have something, having that volunteer experience keeps my mind engaged. It's nice to be able to go out and really help and serve other people. So, like, for instance, last fall I was in the Philippines with a group and we were fitting, we screened 70 amputees. And it was a really neat collaboration between ourselves, Charity Vision, who's a local organization here. They've got a sister organization in the Philippines, which is Mabuhay Deseret. And then we actually partnered with a couple government entities over there to all work together to collaborate and screen these amputees and then ultimately fit 35 of them with prosthetic legs
Wow,
all in 1 week.
that is
Um,
amazing.
it was really neat and a
That is
lot of hard
really
work.
special. Yeah.
It really was. We got part of that experience is you get really dirty.
Hmm.
You end up grinding carbon fiber, which gets all sorts of little shards of glass in your arm, and it hurts like crazy. But in the end, it's just such a fun, enjoyable experience for
Yeah.
us. I think for me, it's like been always something that I've been passionate about is being able to use my skill set to help other people and to serve.
Hmm.
And I think if anything, it just gives me more energy in my other endeavors. So
Yeah.
to your question, like how does that help with other startups?
Yeah.
Like just being involved in that opens up my mind to other approaches that could be taken.
Yeah.
So I think it's critical as an entrepreneur to be well versed in the world so you can be more creative
Hmm.
and understand the all sorts of different approaches that could be taken to solve a
Yeah.
problem.
When faced with a challenge, there's obviously the leap of faith that you need to take in order to be an entrepreneur. And so, what are some effective strategies where you can overcome those challenges and overcome the setbacks that you've been faced with?
Mm, I guess it depends on what challenges we're talking about. Obviously, one is making sure you have the funding to support yourself to do it. And so sometimes it takes sacrifice on your side to make that happen. I think another really important thing that as I've been more and more involved in startups, I've just become a firm believer in is trying to really test out an idea early on with as simple of a solution as possible. So, like for instance, if you're trying to build a tech company
Yeah.
that will build software that will benefit certain businesses, start out just consulting in that area and say, hey, I'm going to do this manually to benefit you guys as a business. Are you willing to hire me for my services to do this? And do the solutions I provide you meet your needs? So
Yeah.
at that point, you haven't developed any code at all. You're
Yeah.
just like, I'm going to test this out, see if there's interest there. And if there's interest, then you can see, okay, I'm onto something. Like
Yeah.
there's some value here.
Yeah.
Now, how do I automate this? How do I codify this? How do I build this into a software that then they'd want to buy?
Hmm.
And that way you're able to test from day one. You can have nothing, like just
Yeah.
a basic spreadsheet, say, here's how I'm going to deliver value. Let's test this out.
Mhm.
This is working. Now let's build something more on this.
Yeah. That's amazing. Um, so what role do you believe technology, particularly advancements in AI, will play in shaping the future of healthcare and assistive technologies for individuals with disabilities?
Hmm, that's a great question. I think it will benefit in all sorts of ways. Obviously, just the fact that you can get a computer to type a lot more for you. I know that's something, folks with disabilities can already use,
Yeah.
need help with,
Yeah.
depending on the kind of disability that they have. I think in general, AI is going to revolutionize healthcare.
Yeah.
I've been reading a book, what is it called? It's like 21 Solutions for the 21st Century
Oh,
by
wow.
Harari. He also wrote like Sapiens and
Yeah.
a couple other books, but it's his view of what's going to happen in the world the next 100 years. And I highly recommend everybody to, if you're interested in the future and like what that holds for us, read that book
Hmm.
because he talks about like the two major disruptors for this century are AI and biotechnology.
Wow.
And so to your question, that's really pairing those together. It's like how can AI and what we're doing to revolutionize healthcare just impact the world? And he thinks it's going to totally disrupt this world. It's going to change the world for better, but also there's a lot of challenges that will come with it too. The advantage of AI is, and this is obviously a controversial topic, but at a certain point, AI could ideally diagnose and treat diseases better than physicians can, just because they can have a perfect knowledge. It can pull in data from all over the world and see what's happened, where a
Yeah.
physician is limited on their training and their expertise.
Hmm.
So it could disrupt what a physician does for their daily job. Upside is though, treatments will improve,
Hmm.
people's health will improve. And ideally, yeah, I honestly see it as becoming a world where AI is one of the major tools that doctors and other people use to complete their jobs.
Yeah.
And so it is critical for everybody to understand how AI can be that tool so you don't get, outdated by
Yeah.
AI itself.
Yeah.
In a perfect example for this, I actually experienced a disruptive technology when I was working for Edwards Life Sciences.
Yeah.
So this was back in 2009, 2010. Edwards was going through this experience because Edwards was the leader in heart valves.
Mm.
And they had, Mr. Edwards was the guy who first invented the heart valve in like 1950, 1960. And he partnered with a physician to like make it, possible.
Mm.
And so Edwards was the leader in heart valves, and the approach at that time, the standard of care was using surgical valves that you do cut open your chest and do open heart surgery, put the patient on bypass so you could implant the heart valve, sew it into place, and
Yeah.
then you'd sew them all back up.
Yeah.
Edwards had found this new technology called transcatheter heart valve technology.
Mm.
Um, and had seen like, hey, this could potentially be disruptive to our industry. And so our leadership had decided instead of letting this technology disrupt us and like instead of us trying to shut them down and beat them out from working, let's actually acquire this technology and let's be the leaders in this. And I remember back in 2009, 2010, our CEO talking to us saying, look, basically 80% of our business or more is surgical heart valves. We are going to disrupt ourselves before this new technology disrupts us. It's better we kill ourselves off than another company killing us. So he said, we are intentionally doing this. We're going to focus on transcatheter heart valves. And that's what they did. But the amazing thing is we became the leaders in that. And big companies like Medtronic and elsewhere were like infringing on our patents, like
Yeah.
really trying to keep up with this disruption
Yeah.
because everybody could see this was huge, right? So we were smart enough to decide let's disrupt ourselves instead of letting somebody else disrupt us. But
Yeah.
I saw the pains that came with it. Like when I was in Switzerland, my job was to meet with the top surgical, cardiac surgeons to
Yeah.
understand like how this disruption would impact them and how we could help them. Because part
Yeah.
of this disruption was, cardiac surgeons had been the ones implanting the surgical valves for decades.
Yeah.
But with this new transcatheter heart valve, it actually shifted the work to the cardiologist, interventionalist. So the cardiac surgeons were losing that line of business.
Yeah.
And we started out saying, hey, we actually need both in the operating room. We need a cardiac surgeon and a cardiologist interventionalist. Just in case anything goes wrong, the cardiac surgeon can step in and do surgery on the patient. But still, I remember when I was in Switzerland, I was going to conferences. I was meeting with top cardiac surgeons in like London and
Oh,
Spain and Italy, all over, and they were upset.
yeah.
They were very mad. And I remember one guy, he actually worked at the hospital across from Westminster Abbey and all like downtown London, like was in the main hospital there.
Yeah.
And he was pounding his fist on the pulpit at this conference saying, guys, this is all out war. We have to stop this. Like they are taking our work away from us. We need to stop this.
Yikes.
So it was this challenging disruption where it's like the people who we work with were very upset with us, and we had to figure out how do we strategically work with them
Yeah.
to keep them involved, keep them, as our supporters instead of making them major distractors of us. Um,
Oh, will you go more into that? Like how you
yeah.
were able to keep working with them and keep the connection good?
Mm-hmm. So part of it was making sure, at least up front, and I believe they still do this. I haven't been involved for a few years now, but ensuring that the cardiac surgeon was still involved in the procedure, had to be in the surgical suite when it was happening. That was one way you kept them involved. The other thing I was doing when I was working for that business unit in Europe, because I
Mhm.
was working for the surgical heart valve business,
Yeah.
I was pitching to them the idea of using a minimally invasive heart valve. So it's still a surgical valve, but much more of a step towards this transcatheter valve, which was very minimally invasive. Like
Yeah.
the transcatheter heart valve, all you need to do is put a little slit in your leg, and then
Wow.
you'd snake that heart valve up through your vasculature and balloon it into place in your heart, all while the heart's still beating. So you don't put them on bypass, you don't do anything. It was amazing. So you went from like
That's fascinating.
totally opening somebody up,
Oh
implanting a
my God.
valve, and requiring like weeks of recovery to
Yeah.
like you put a valve in and the next day they're jogging again.
Yeah.
So it was a total transition. So what I was doing is saying, hey, instead of using like this major open heart surgery approach, let's start using at least minimally invasive heart valves, something where you could do a much smaller incision either here or on the side and still
Yeah.
implant the heart valve to like push you much closer
Yeah.
to what the transcatheter heart valve was doing. So trying to give them other options to improve their skill set. But you'll find honestly is like a lot of the older surgeons were resistant to change. They had like developed their skills over decades of doing a certain approach. And so they would push against it and say, hey, there's all these reasons why we shouldn't do it. But ultimately it's just hard to teach an old dog new tricks sort of thing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Unfortunately, our time is already coming to an end, but I would just love to close with some advice you'd give to any aspiring entrepreneurs of how to kind of make it through the journey.
Yeah. I think the three bits of advice that I would give, there are three quotes that I just love. And so when people ask, this always comes to mind for
Yeah.
me. So first off, as a missionary in Russia,
Mhm.
I remember an area authority coming and teaching us essentially like as a missionary, if you can believe in an idea and if you can conceive, you will achieve. So yeah, the quote was, if you believe and can conceive, you will achieve. The idea being like, if you believe in yourself and what and your idea you're trying to do, and you can conceive how to do it, you will achieve it. So it takes a lot of like belief in yourself and basically understanding how it should be done. It has to align with your heart and your mind.
Yeah,
Second quote would be, from good to great. It's a classic one is first who, then what. So make sure you understand like who you're working with, who your partners are, and also who your customers are, and then really deliver on what that should be, what they need. And the final one, my dad always taught me this as a kid, and I love this concept. You need to work hard and play hard. And as we talked about, you can kind of see that in my life. I see 2 feet prosthetics in a lot of ways as more play. And
yeah,
so I find it critical as an entrepreneur to work really hard on what I'm working on, but also find time to play hard, be it through nonprofit work, be it through, skiing, mountain biking, hanging out with my family, whatever it is. Make sure you always find time for that because that gives you enough gas in the tank to keep going on whatever you're working on.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. You have fascinating stories and advice, and we are excited to be able to share what you've shared with us today with all the other people. So thank you so much for your time.
You bet. Thank you.